Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this ACP webinar with David Marlin from Metacomet. I'm going to let David introduce himself and introduce his topic for the day, but we're very excited that you're here today. This session will be recorded, so if you want to share it with others on your staff or others in your peer area, please feel free to do so. You'll be able to find the recording probably within about a couple hours at the ACP website under events and webinars. And then all webinars that we've had in the past are also listed there too, so take a moment to scroll the list and see if there's anything else of interest to you. So this is the way things are going to go. David is going to take charge. I'm going to serve as your host and facilitator for whatever needs to be facilitated. Part of that is going to be time, so I will let y'all know when we're getting close to our time. We want to respect the time that you have and the hour that you've set aside. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to use the question or chat area on your screen. David will be pausing periodically throughout the presentation to take your questions and comments, and I will help get those in front of him. Otherwise, I think that's all the housekeeping we need to take care of. So let me pass it on to David, and it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Therese. Hi, everybody. Great to be here with you all. Thank you all for taking the time. So my name's David Marlin. I'm the co-founder of Metacomet Systems. I founded Metacomet. It boggles my mind every time I say this, but about 25 years ago. I've been heavily involved in the publishing industry since about 1998. I've served on the book industry study group. For most of that time, I've been chair of a couple different committees there. So I've got a long, deep history with publishing. So today we're going to talk about mastering royalties post-publication to drive great author relationships. Again, it's great to see some familiar names out there, and to everybody, welcome. So I'm going to start with a story about a publisher who's a customer of ours. To protect them, I'm going to make up a name. I'm going to call them Skyward Publishing. So Skyward Publishing reached out to us. This was a couple years now ago, and like the way most of our customers start working with us, they reached out, they asked for some more information, we gave them a demo, and then they signed on, and we started working with them. They, told us that they really valued their author relationships, and they were concerned they weren't doing royalties quite right, and it was also taking them way too much time. So we brought them through, we call it our Meta Go Live process. It's a very standardized process we have to get people up and running. We loaded in their titles, loaded in their authors, worked with them to set up all their contracts. And then, as we always do, we did what's called a parallel run, where we took their sales data from a prior royalty period and ran it against the contracts and compared it to the actual results that they had come in. And the statements didn't match. And that happens, maybe there was some issue with the way the contracts were entered or the way the sales was entered. So we redid it. We checked everything. It looked like everything was done correctly. So we loaded those in again. Still didn't match. So we said, you know what, let's go back another period. So we went back to the prior royalty period. I think they were doing semi-annual royalty statements, and tried it again. We loaded the sales for that period. Statements didn't match. So it was a moment of, I wonder what's going on. So we tried it yet again, and nothing matched. So they realized that they had never paid out royalties correctly, and that was a big uh-oh moment for them. So today, we have just under an hour together, and I'd like to cover 3 topics and answer a couple questions for you during our time together. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what authors want post-publication, and I'm going to actually ask for your input into this as well. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how royalties fit into this post-publication picture, and how can you, some ideas for how you can deliver on the author relationship. I'm also going to answer a couple questions for you. So basically, a question I get is, will automation really do what I tell you it can do? And also, since we're members of the ACP, I'm just going to let you guys know about the ACP member benefit that we have for ACP members. So I'm gonna, as part of this, I'm gonna make it a little interactive. I'm also going to be switching between the screen sharing and my camera. I am going to now in the chat post oh, I can't post it to everybody. So Therese, I'm going to put this in there, and maybe if you're able to post it to everybody. It's a link to the polling service that we're going to use, because I'm going to ask you guys for your input. I'll also have a QR code that I'm going to put up on the screen, so you guys will be able to do this on your phone or on your computer. As Therese mentioned, as I go through this, please feel free to put any questions in as they come up into the question section. I'll be pausing a couple times to look and see what people have put up there and give you a chance to put in ask some additional questions that you may have. So to start, please, if you haven't clicked on the link, please scan this QR code with your phone. Again, this is the first time I'm doing this. I was at a presentation last week, and they were doing this, and it was just so much fun that I decided I wanted to incorporate this into this. So I'll give you all a moment to please just scan the QR code. It'll bring you to this website called Menti, and I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions. So let me just start by addressing the first topic I said I'd talk about, which is what do authors want post-publication? As I mentioned at the beginning, I've been doing this for 25 years now. I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of publishers over that time. And so I have a pretty good sense of what authors want. But just in preparation for this webinar, I reached out to a bunch of our customers, and I also reached out to some authors just to get their perspective. And I want to share that with you guys a little bit later. But right now, I'm hoping to get your feedback. So let me start this up. So hopefully this works, and you guys should now on your phone or on your screen have access to this questionnaire. So I'm just going to ask you guys, and the QR code's up there if you didn't have a chance to download it, to please just take a minute and write down or just check off what you think is most important to authors post publication. So is it an author newsletter? Is it keeping them up to date? PR reports indicates that's public relations. Do they want to know what kind of PR you're getting for it? Is it accurate and timely royalties? Is it online royalty statements, monthly sales data, online contract access, their position in various lists? So how are they doing the Amazon bestseller list? Do they want self-service capabilities, or are there other things? And if you do choose other and you're amenable to it, I'd love to see what you think about it in the chat. So this is great. I see a bunch of people have been filling this out, so thank you. So I'll just hold off here for another minute and let you guys keep filling this out. So this is basically confirming what I would have thought. Some of you still haven't filled it out yet, so I'll just if you're having trouble again, you can just scan the QR code. But we got a good number of responses. So so this is great. Thank you guys very much for doing this. So it's pretty clear, which thank you guys for confirming my suspicions. It's pretty clear that royalty statements, I'll actually go back there a little bit. Royalty statements are, accurate and timely royalties are most important to authors. Access to monthly sales data that confirms what I would have thought. Self-service, that's really interesting to hear. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, actually a fair bit about that towards the end of the presentation. Online access to contracts, that's really interesting. So thank you guys for providing all this. It's also, it's interesting. Some of you, the PR reports are important, which is interesting. Online access to royalty statements. So thank you guys for sharing this. So what are the benefits to strong author relations? I think it's pretty obvious, but I want to share what our customers have told us over the years. So you guys invest in your authors. You develop a relationship. You are probably teaching them some things about publishing and some best practice. And next time they publish a book, you want to take advantage of that. So you want them to come back to you for their next book. So obviously, strong author relations are good for that. Word of mouth. If they have a good experience, there's a reasonable chance that they know other authors in the space. And I think especially in your space of Catholic publishing, I think a lot of these authors know each other, and so they can share their good experience and hopefully send new authors to you. And really, ultimately, it's just more fun to be a publisher when you're getting along well with your authors versus dealing with either not dealing with them, like just letting the relationship drop afterwards, or having it be a stressful relationship with negative energy. So we just touched on the first topic, what authors want publication, post publication, and we'll be coming back to that a little bit because I want to share what I heard from our existing publishers and authors. So now let's talk a little bit about how royalties fit in. So many of the things, as you guys confirm, that authors are looking for post-publication is the royalty statement. And in many ways, it's the ultimate deliverable. So what's involved in as the presentation is called, mastering royalties post-publication? So I'd like to start by showing you the royalty management lifecycle. So over the years, we've come to the realization that there's really four main phases to royalty management. There's what we call the acquisition phase. This is where you agree to publish a new title with with an existing author or a new author, and you create a contract around that, which specifies all the royalty rules. Then you go about selling their books, and then the next phase of the royalty management lifecycle is you're receiving all your sales data. So, this is you might work with a distributor. Maybe your distributor distributes all your books, your physical and ebooks. Most of our customers have multiple sources, so they might work with a distributor. They might do some of their own digital distribution, their own audio distribution. You're probably getting rights income. So the second phase is consolidating all this sales data so you can make valuable use of it. And then the third phase of the royalty management life cycle is calculating the royalties from those sales reports, applying them against the rules that were specified in that acquisition phase. And a sort of sidebar of this is giving you access to some valuable information in the form of reports that you can use. And then the final aspect to royalty management is at the end of every royalty period, sending out payments and corresponding royalty statements. So this is so we're going to talk about acquisition now. When it comes to first though, when it comes to handling royalties, you really have two options. You either do it manually, and by manually I mean usually with Excel or maybe Google Sheets, or you have an automated royalty system in place. So I'm going to go through and show you what automation can look like, and I'm also going to talk about some of the issues that you may encounter doing this manually. Now, I want to make clear that automation is not always the right choice. So if I seem to be making the manual process out to be untenable, before you make a decision on that, wait till we get to the last slide of this section, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to decide where and when it makes sense to automate. The spoiler, though, for when we do get there, is that at a certain size, if you're not automating, you're probably making mistakes. This is what happened to Skyward Publishing that I spoke about earlier. And I'll talk more about that as we progress. So in preparation for this webinar, I wanted to get, because we're going to talk about acquisition now, so I wanted to get a picture of an author signing a contract. And I subscribed to the upgraded version of ChatGPT, and I said, draw me a pic, give me an image of an author signing a contract. And I had never used ChatGPT or AI for image generation before. This is a total aside, but there's so much buzz about AI. This was surprisingly difficult to get this. And it's really interesting to see the biases that ChatGPT had. I had to ask it multiple times and ask it for various iterations of this. But basically what you're looking at is I said to ChatGPT, their DALL-E image generation tool, create an image of an author signing a contract. So this first phase, the acquisition phase, you guys are familiar with your publishing contracts with your authors, and there's a lot of text in there about intellectual property, about what you're going to do for them, and your various agreements. And then there's usually a couple paragraphs that describe the royalty rules, and maybe a couple other sections that talk about the timing. And so if you're doing this manually, you need to record these rules in an Excel spreadsheet, and that will enable you to come back and apply your sales later and calculate the royalties. If you're taking an automated approach, whatever system you'll use, you'll be entering your contract details as structured data into that system. So I'm going to just show you guys what it looks like in our system. So essentially, I mentioned structured data. Structured data just means taking the information that's in that contract, that probably PDF that you guys are sharing with your authors, and extracting out the key data elements so that you can, so an automated process, whether it's Excel using formulas or a system, an automated royalty system, can calculate those royalties. So all automated royalty systems are going to have some variation of what you're seeing on this screen. So on the left here, you're going to see a list of all the authors that are receiving royalties. So this is just an example of a title called The Guide to Simple Royalty Management. And then for each author on the right, you're going to see their royalty rules. And everybody's royalty rules, there tend to be a lot of similarities, but usually they're broken out by, you pay different rules by format. So here it's like ebook, hardcover, audio, and then licensing is sub rights. But sometimes it's by channel. Are you selling it through a church, perhaps? Or is the author selling it themselves? Are you selling it through retail? And sometimes it could just be a flat rate. Sometimes it can be geographic. So you'll set up these royalty terms as structured data, as is defined in your contract. You might have reserves, which we're showing here, so you'll specify those. For those of you who may not be familiar, reserves against returns is there's different meanings for the word reserve, but reserves against returns, a lot of publishers hold back a portion of the royalties that they owe to protect themselves in case those physical books get returned down the road. And then that way they don't have to worry about having overpaid the author, and then they'll release those reserves at a later point. Some publishers have payment terms too, like, for instance, Amazon typically doesn't pay publishers for 90 days, I believe it is, after they send you their sales reports on their digital content. So you might want to wait 90 days to pay for ebooks before you send that money to your authors. So the next phase of royalty management is the aggregating your sales. Here's another ChatGPT generated diagram. I'll tell you, the time it took me to generate this on ChatGPT, it would have been so much quicker for me to just cut and paste a bunch of pictures of files and a machine to process it. I'm trying to show that you've got a bunch of sales files that are getting processed through some kind of a tool and consolidated all into one. That's the sales aggregation piece. So what are the challenges with sales aggregation? Well, unless all of your sales are coming through, say, a distributor, a single source, you're going to get multiple different sales files. And those all have to be combined into a single database or a single file, because otherwise it's really not practical to apply royalties or to analyze that data. We have customers, I'd say most of our customers probably get about 3, 4, 5 files. A lot of them get maybe 10, 12 files. Our biggest, they're not our biggest customer. The customer that gets the most. We have one customer that gets 100 sales files every month. Can you imagine that, having to deal with 100? So even five or even 3 or 4 sales files can be difficult because they're all different. Some of them have, the fields are in different locations. They have different names. It might be called an ISBN on this file and a product ID on this file. Some of them might show the region, others might show a retailer. Some of them even have different units. Like, for instance, when you sell on KDP, if you sell on KDP, you're going to get minutes read. But if you sell through traditional ebooks, you're going to get units sold. So how do you reconcile all that? So there's a lot of complications to aggregating sales data. I so about so I'm going to show you guys a tool. So there's so I used to do this in my early days. I used to do. We came out with. I'm going to show you. This type of tool is called what they call an ETL tool in the data technology world. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. So basically, it's just a fancy way of saying we memorize different file templates, and then we can suck in the data from any file of that type and consolidate it all. If you're automating, there's a lot of different ETL tools on the market. This is our version of that tool. The nice thing about the ETL tools is they'll show you all the files you ever imported. They'll give you information about that file. How much sales you sold, the units, etc. They'll be able to save the file for you to access it later. Now, if you're doing this manually, and again, before we came out with this tool about 2015, uh, I used to do this for customers once in a while, back in the day, and actually quite a bit in the very early days. And it is deceptively difficult. I mean, if you're combining 1, 2, maybe 3 files, it's not so bad. But as you guys probably mostly know, once you get more than a couple of files that you have to combine, it can get really surprisingly, it doesn't seem like it should, but it can get surprisingly complicated and challenging. You got to rearrange the columns and copy and paste or import, deal with conversion. Then you got to remember, did I already paste that file in or not? Where am I storing them all? And it starts to become surprisingly easy to make mistakes. So that's where the value of automation comes in, is it can eliminate that. But if you're only dealing with a couple or a few files, it's not too bad to do it manually. And again, I'm going to give you kind of a mental framework to help decide where automation might make sense. So I'm going to look really quick and see if there's any questions in here in the chat or the questions area. So just bear with me here. So no questions so far. So I'm just a reminder, please, as we go along, if any questions pop up, feel free to put them in the question section or in the chat. Oops, sorry. Okay, so let's take a look back at the overall life cycle again. So we've talked about the acquisition phase. We've talked about the receiving sales data phase of the royalty management life cycle. So you've recorded all your royalty details again in the acquisition phase. And so now the key is getting all those sales that you've just aggregated to process through those rules that you set up. So Let's go back for a moment to Skyward Publishing. So you'll recall, as I had mentioned, um, that they never paid out accurate royalties. Every semi-annual period, they try to apply their consolidated sales to the royalty rules, and every period they made mistakes, and those mistakes risked seriously damaging their author relationship. So, what are the kinds of mistakes they made, and that are most common when you're doing this in a spreadsheet or in Excel? Well, one of them is the concept of escalators or sliding scales or tiers. So, you might have a clause that says for the first 1,000 units of ebooks or paperback books, we're going to pay one rate, and then it goes to the next rate. If you're doing this manually in Excel and you have more than a handful of titles, that gets really hard to track, and it's really easy to make a mistake there. Um, Advances, keeping track of advances, because as a lot of you know, most advances tend to not ever get fully paid out. So you're always carrying those forward. So you have to go back, see what you had last time left over, bring it forward on the spreadsheet, and automatically apply rules again, the new royalties against that. Returns, with both withholding returns, keeping track of how much you held, and then knowing when to release them. So actually, that's more reserves. Returns is just, so if you're holding reserves against returns, it's virtually impossible to do. I mean, I've seen people do it, but it's really hard to do manually. Um, Returns, so deducting sales, not allocating all the line items. This was one of the big issues that Skyward had was, they'd use a VLOOKUP. A lot of you who do this in Excel are probably familiar with that, to associate the sale line items with the contract, and some of those sales would just get missed, and they would have no way of knowing that. Or misallocating sales line items, like associating the wrong sale with the wrong title, or just human error putting the formulas in wrong. Um, and then there's no good, when you're doing it manually, there's not really a good way to reconcile, and to just kind of double check that you're doing this all right. With an automated system, these issues should be virtually eliminated. You know, so I'm going to say something that might sound a little harsh or controversial, but once you hit a certain volume of titles, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 25, everybody's a little different, you will make mistakes if you're doing this manually. And I say that with confidence because in my 25 years of doing this, we always do parallel runs. And I think with one exception in 25 years, everybody has made mistakes doing it manually. Um, it is virtually impossible to accurately calculate royalties for more than, if you have really simple royalties, like one rule for all your sales, that will increase your probability. But it's virtually impossible to do this without an automated system. So, oops, okay, so now we're going to look at the third phase of the royalty management life cycle here now. So we've calculated royalties, and because we've calculated royalties, we can now generate some reports if you're using an automated system. If you're not, it's much harder to get these reports. So we've discovered, in the years of doing this, that publishers really only need three reports to get virtually all the information that they need to manage royalties, to manage their business, as it relates to royalties. The first of those reports is what we call a sales reconciliation report. It's basically every single sale transaction that you have received, and it should be able to tell you a lot of things. One is, here you can see some of them are highlighted. So these are sales that did not get processed. You'll recall I earlier said a lot of people use like VLOOKUPs, to associate the sales with when they're using it in Excel. What if, there was an issue and the ISBN didn't exist, or some other issue and the VLOOKUP just missed some sales? So a sales reconciliation report will show you any sales that were missed. It'll also show you all the details of that sale, including the royalty calculation amount. A lot of times when you get the sales report, you're only going to have the ISBN, so you don't necessarily know what title it is, who the author is. So it'll add all that information in. It'll show you the details of the royalty calculation. Um, and so you can then slice and dice this kind of report. You can, download it to Excel or in whatever system you're using, apply some filters and selection criteria, and say like really quickly get a view of all your sales by author, or all your sales by title, or all your sales by format. Um, it's a really easy way to get all your royalty accruals. Um, so the second report is very similar to this report, but it's much smaller. We call it the adjustment reconciliation report. So that's just all of the any deductions or additions you made to your royalty statement. Typically, it'll be advances, but if you charge any fees to your authors, um, that would be in that report. And then the third report brings together those other two detailed reports and summarizes everything into we call it a statement balances report. It's really just a summary report by title and author, so that for every title and author you can see um, what their prior balance was, how many royalties they've earned this period, if you've held any new adjustments or fees, the reserves, and then finally how much you owe them. And this report is really, this is where this report is super useful. If a good version of this report, and again, any decent automated royalty system, any good automated royalty system will have something similar to this report. Um, uh, it will uh, it will exactly tie out to the statements. It'll exactly tie out to those other reports. So it makes it really easy to reconcile and fully audit, and just give yourself a really high degree of confidence that everything's coming out right. It's also really easy to get, virtually all our publishers want to know what their royalty accruals are. Some of them want to know it at the title or ISBN level. Some of them just want to know it at the uh, the overall level. So by accruals, I just mean how much royalties you owe. So you can just summarize, one of these columns up here, like the royalties column or the project balance column, to just see how much you owe or how many royalties, because there's more factors that play into what you owe, how many royalties you've accrued. And then you can get an accurate sense of your P&L, your profitability, because royalties are going to represent somewhere between, maybe 8 to maybe 50% of your expense for any title. So if you want to really understand the profitability of a book, a report like this is really important. So this now brings us to the final phase of the royalty management lifecycle, which is distributing statements and payments. And if you're doing this manually in Excel, then or Google Sheets, then you're printing these out or PDFing them, um, sticking them in an email or printing them out and mailing them. And if you're just doing a dozen, it's not too big a deal. But if you're doing more than that, it does start to get very time consuming. So if you're using an automated system, imagine just being able to select all of your statements. So in our system, you just select this top box and it selects everything for you, and then just hitting this button, send. And that's all you have to do, and your authors just get their royalty statement. Some of them you might not have email addresses for, so you might need to print those out and mail those through traditional mail. In our case, it'll know which ones you have email addresses for and which ones you don't. So it'll print out the ones you need it to, or email the ones that you do have addresses for. So that becomes just boom, push of a button. It saves hours and hours and hours of effort. Again, if you only have a handful of titles, that's not too big a deal. But as you guys have probably experienced, as you get more titles, it becomes almost like exponentially more difficult to deal with this. And then related to that is the payment piece. When you select how many, who you're going to pay, you guys are probably all doing your royalty payments using a system like QuickBooks or NetSuite, or maybe through your bank. So the value of being able to export a file that you can then upload to those systems to generate the payments, that'll save you a tremendous amount of time. Um, so so in terms of, okay, so we talked about so those are the four phases of royalty management. We talked about how important the statement, the accurate royalties are to the author relationship. So what do authors want from their royalty statements? Because that's really where you report to them their royalties. And ultimately, they want clean, clear, accurate statements. We talked about um, how this is the most important thing that your authors want at post publication. And when you have, when you've mastered this process, you're going to deliver statements in a timely way, which is going to keep your authors happy because some of them don't pay too close attention, but as you guys know, some of them are just the day they're due. If they're not there, you're going to get a phone call or an email. So it just makes it really easy to deliver them in a timely way. It makes them professional looking, which gives them confidence in the results. They can often tell if it's been done in Excel, and that can raise some questions. It gives them a level of granularity, so they can see the information broken out in a way that they would like to see it. And you can also use the royalty statements to post messages. So it's a way, this wasn't a high priority that you guys had listed, but I've heard it from a few publishers that they like to be able to communicate information to their authors. And the royalty statement is one way, non-royalty information is one way that you can do that. So this is just an example of a royalty statement. There's many different ways royalty statements can look. This just breaks it out by format, and it shows your authors the royalty calculation by format. So I told you earlier that doing this manually isn't necessarily an issue, and automation doesn't always make sense. So now I'm gonna give you a kind of a mental framework to determine if automation makes sense, or to help you figure it out. But just a quick reminder, if you guys have any questions, please put them into the question section of the GoToWebinar, and I will get to those at the end or as I see them pop up. So before we go into this kind of mental framework I was talking about, I'd like to do another poll if you guys could indulge me. And for that, again, this should, okay, so if you're doing this on your computer, this should now be the active poll that you see. If you did it on your phone, the QR code's up there again if you didn't get it last time. I would just love to get a sense of how people are currently doing their royalties today. Are you doing it, do you have a royalty system? Are you doing it manually, entirely in Excel? Or do you have a system, but it doesn't quite do everything and there's some manual effort involved? So I'm just gonna give you guys a minute to respond to this. So if any of you guys are curious for presentations you might do, I've never used this before, but I'm using this tool called Menti, and it was really easy to set up. So if you guys ever are giving a presentation, and isn't this cool the way you can see the results come in, and it's built right into PowerPoint. So you can this is a PowerPoint slide that is accessing their platform. Um, so. All right, so this is really interesting. I would say this is pretty common. Usually, I would expect to see a few more people who are doing it strictly manual, but it's good to see that a bunch of you have a royalty system. Um, and this is very common. You've got a royalty system, but it doesn't quite do everything, and so you still have to do a fair bit of manual work on the side. So thank you guys all for sharing that with me. So now let's go into this mental framework I was talking to you guys about. So I've used this a few times and I've gotten some positive feedback on it. So I'll share this with you. I've used it in a slightly different context. But I went to business school, I have an MBA, and in business school, they always use this concept for anything you're going to spend money on called return on investment. So many of you may be familiar, all of you may be familiar with this, but it's basically a way of looking at if I'm going to spend some money on any kind of investment, whether it's marketing, whether it's a tool, what's my return on that going to be? And you can think of it as a percentage, like for an investment, I'm going to get a 10% return. You can think of it in a time frame, like this will have a 1 year ROI. In other words, it'll pay for itself in a year. So basically, it's what's the benefit divided by what's the cost. Um, so so going back to Skyward Publishers, why hadn't they invested in a system previously? And probably the biggest reason was cost. I mean, a royalty system, it's a very complex piece of software. And they tend to not be like cheap, like, Microsoft Word or something like that. Um, by their own admission, they had waited too long though. So if they had kind of used this mental framework, I think they would have come to the realization sooner that they needed an automated system. So when you look at net profit, sorry, return on investment, and you're looking at the benefit, one key thing to look at is how much time people in your organization or you are spending doing royalties. And when people look at the time, I find that they make two common mistakes. One is they don't adequately value their time. And the other is they're not always including everything that they're spending their time on. So they might not include the time it took them to consolidate all their sales files, or they might not include the time it took them to pretty up the royalty statements in Excel and then attach them to an email. Um, Very often, it doesn't include the time that it took them to deal with questions from their authors. As I'm sure you guys know, every time an author calls up, that's work that you have to do, and that can be really time-consuming work. So the time is one of the big elements to the benefit. Then there's risk, and I like to think of risk as like an insurance policy. Like, how do you value risk? I mean, business school, they have this thing called the beta, where it's just this kind of arbitrary percentage that you attach to things to come up with a value for risk. But I think of it as in like almost in like terms of insurance. So like, how much is it worth to you to know that your royalties are going to be accurate, or to at the very least know that you're doing everything in your power to give your authors accurate royalties? Is it worth a few $1,000s a year, $5,000 a year, $10,000 a year? Again, this is just a mental framework, but how much would you be willing to pay for an insurance policy to ensure that you had accurate statements? And then a cost to all this, something that deducts from the benefit, is what's the negative impact to making mistakes in your royalty statements. Now, when it came to Skyward Publishing, they got so lucky because none of their authors caught any of their mistakes. Because the statements, the calculations, the numbers that were on the statements, from what I recall, were reasonably correct. It's just the stuff that was on those statements wasn't correct. So that negative impact, we have clients that get so, like, we have one client who is a very famous author, and she is extremely vocal. And if she finds out or suspects an issue with her royalty statement, she posts it all over social media, and then all the other authors that work with that publisher will start to get freaked out. And she's threatened to do that to them. So that's a big negative impact. You know, Based on your genre of publishing, hopefully you guys have more ethically minded authors that you work with than that. But uh, that is uh, a cost. And then another benefit is, okay, so it saves you time, but how do you value that time? Well, what could you be doing? There's the direct cost of the time, but what else could you be doing to bring benefit? Could you be working on, improving your Onyx feed and selling more sales? So that's basically a mental framework for conceptually looking at whether or not it's worth automating. And what I find is that for 10 or 20 titles, you can pretty much get away with doing it mostly or totally, partially manually. And then it starts to really become burdensome and error prone. So, I told you, does automation pay for itself? Or is it, or sorry, does it do what I promised you to do? So I just have one customer testimonial um, that I just wanted to show you guys. And this isn't just our system. If you have a good automated system, you are going to benefit tremendously. Um, there's good systems and there's bad systems out there. We're not the only good system. There's a lot of other systems out there. They're not all good, I'll tell you that. A lot of people switch over, but there's other solid systems out there, and they'll all give you this kind of benefit. Um, so to end, I want to keep an eye on time and leave a few minutes for questions. Again, please put any questions you might have in the question section. Um, so, I mentioned in the beginning, I reached out to to a bunch of our customers and some authors, and asked them for their opinion about what's important post-publication. And so I just thought I'd share with you some of the things that they got back to me with. One, I thought of the most insightful pieces of advice I got was strong author relationships start well before the book is published. It starts with a contract and setting a positive relationship and making sure that there's a full understanding between you and the author um, before you even sign the contract. And having those hard conversations early. And by that I mean, having done sales for a lot of my life, it's very easy to leave things out just to get people to sign on the dotted line, and it usually comes back to bite you. So have those hard conversations early. Um, a bunch of people told me setting proper expectations. Let them know what they can expect from you. Let them know how you're going to promote their book if that's part of what you offer. Help them understand the life cycle of a book. Like, these are the steps to get it out the door, and there's going to be challenges and disappointments. It's a long process, so don't get too down by the disappointments. Just giving them that heads up in advance, because if you set those expectations, they'll be much happier and when they encounter those issues. And then um, educate them on what a royalty statement looks like before it arrives. Again, you guys all know every time you get a call from an author, it's time. It's time, and it could even be frustration that you have to deal with. By setting their expectations in advance and educating them, maybe sending them out a sample of what the royalty statement looks like and what is normal, what they can expect on that statement, that will be a big help too. Um, I heard from a few people that regular communications, are good. Like, I say here, monthly royalty statements are the gold standard. Don't worry about that, because like 10% of our customers, if that, do monthly royalty statements. Very few people. They're very hard to do. You don't have to worry about doing monthly royalty statements. But the point is regular contact with them. PR reports, what kind of PR are you doing? One of my publishers mentioned that they like to do annual state of the company Zoom meetings. Uh, Authors crave information, so giving them as much as they can. And then I mentioned at the end that at the beginning, self-service capability. So giving your authors, empowering them to maybe update their contact info, sharing some stats with them, giving them access to their contracts, sharing guides, how-to guides, how to publicize yourself, manuscript submission guidelines, that kind of thing. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. So I'm going to do one last poll here. Again, you can scan the QR code if you don't have it up. Oh, did you guys already? Looks like people already filled this in. Maybe some of you already. Some of you already got to this. So, what would you like to see if you had an author portal? What kind of things would you like your authors to have access to, or do you think your authors would like to have access to? So you'll see a slider, so you can just slide the bar back and forth on a scale of 1 to 5, I believe it is. If you don't think anything is good, just keep it all at once. So I'm really curious what's important to you guys. So if you don't mind just sliding that bar back and forth, hopefully this is working. Um, and is it important? Do you think does a royalty portal need to, or an author portal? I think royalty statements are a pretty obvious one. Do your authors want access to their contracts? Do they want a newsletter? I've heard mixed things on all these. Real-time sales data. The thing with real-time sales data, here I am skewing your opinion probably, is if you give them real-time sales data, it almost always results in more questions. And so a lot of our customers don't like to give real-time sales data because they know they're going to get lots of questions. What's this negative sale? Well, it's a return. Why is this sale for $0? Well, it's a review copy that we sent out. Would it be valuable for your authors to be able to submit their manuscripts, update their contact information, see what kind of PR they're getting, have access to author resources? So this is really fascinating. I thank you guys for sharing this with me. I really appreciate that. Um, so, so the last thing is I told you guys I would just share with you the ACP member benefit. So as a member of ACP, we offer all ACP members their first, if you decide to work with us to automate your royalties, we offer you your first 2 months free. And for anybody who's on this webinar, we're also going to offer an extra benefit of 50% off the setup fee. And I'd like to just almost conclude to let you know Rachel Rigdon from Metacomet, she's our director of sales. She's going to be at the annual members meeting next week. She'd love to talk to any of you guys. Her email is here. You may have gotten an email from us about meeting up with us. You're welcome to reach out to me anytime. If you'd like more info on royalties, what we do, how we can help, we have a lot of resources in our blog. Please feel free to visit our website. So now just one more poll, and then I'm going to take a pause and see if you have any questions. This one, I'm not going to share the results. I'm a little nervous about that. And I don't know who's submitting what, so it's anonymous. But I would love to just get your feedback on, did you find value in this webinar? How did this polling work for you? What did you think of that? And then just kind of a generic question about whether you see value in an online portal. So at this point, we have just a few minutes left. Please type in any questions that you have. I would love to talk anything about royalties. I just stopped showing my screen here. And again,
I'm going to join you again, David.
Sorry?
I'm going to join you again.
Oh, okay, great.
So, anybody, you all saw the email addresses for David and Rachel. Rachel will be on site in Chicago at a membership meeting, as David mentioned. So, if you want to talk with someone in person, that would be a great opportunity. And we do share our registration list for our membership meeting with our sponsors and exhibitors. So that's why you might have received an email from them already. So please feel free to engage in conversation with them. We strongly encourage. Obviously, they're experts in this area, and we'd like to spread the expertise around. If you find that you have questions after this, remember this is recorded, so you'll always be able to find those email addresses at the end of the presentation. And I don't see any questions or anything right now. So David, I think we're probably good for right now. For all of those of you who need to sit and think about it for a while, you have a chance to do that and contact David at a later date. Thank you, David and Metacomet, for being here and being one of the members that supports the ACP. We really appreciate your participation. Look forward to seeing Rachel at the membership meeting. And until the next time, we look forward to seeing you at the next ACP webinar. Goodbye, David. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Therese. Thank you, everybody, for joining.